This is Noa Dalzell, and I'm here with another episode of You Got Boston with the renowned Keith Smith of Spotrac, who knows more about the salary cap than probably almost anybody in this world right now. So very excited to have him on. As I told you guys multiple times over the past few weeks, I am not the salary cap expert. So I figured that why not just bring in somebody that much better understands the predicament the Celtics are in this offseason. Keith, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm going to take that and clip it and send it to my mom. She'll love that. So that'll be good.
I think it's accurate. I was kind of asking around. I was like, I really want to bring somebody on. Everybody said Keith Smith. So it was kind of consensus in the NBA world.
I appreciate it.
So Keith, I know you also started at Celtics blog where I did as well. So I know a lot of fans are familiar, with your work there, which you kind of, blazed a lot of the path of the things that I wanted to do. So from that standpoint, it's also very cool to have you here. As you look at the Celtics offseason and kind of the position that they find themselves in, and obviously a lot of things have gone wrong between the Tatum's, injury, the second round exit. What do you think is realistically possible and kind of what do you think is most likely to happen? And maybe actually before that, if you could share just your thoughts on the restrictions that are coming into effect here.
Yeah, I think obviously things took a big turn. I'd been saying for months that if the Celtics had won the title again or were even in the finals and it was like a really competitive finals, I didn't think they were going to do a whole lot of changes to the roster. I know Celtics fans very, very well. They weren't going to stand with a new owner coming in and being like, let's blow up the title team. No one was going to deal with that. So I think now what they're in a position to do is they're not going to rebuild, but it's just a reset, a gap year. That's probably where we're headed for this team. I think some of the changes that were likely to come at some point are probably now maybe accelerated a bit. We're going to see some of those changes come. And a lot of that is around that dreaded second apron, right? That everybody knows the term, but I don't know that everybody knows exactly what that means. And essentially what the NBA under the current CBA has done is there's like kind of 4 to 5 levels of where you can be as a team. You can be under the cap. That one's easy, right? You have cap space. You can go sign, trade for whoever. That's really only the Nets this offseason, but it's where it's at. Then you have the tax, the teams that are kind of in between the cap and the tax. They've got enough room. You have the luxury tax, which is we're expensive, but we're not wildly expensive yet. Then you have the first apron. We're getting more expensive. Then the second apron, which is we're really expensive. And what the CBA was designed to do was limit those really expensive teams from just continuing to add salary and add players and add talent just by going out and putting together, two $20 million players and getting a $45 million player. And the things that had been done for years and years and years where you were creating this pretty wide imbalance between the most expensive teams in the league, which generally correlated with teams that were pretty good, and then the teams that were just regular good and regular type of outlay in salary, and that created this imbalance. So the restrictions now on a second apron team, it's a little easier to say the things they can do because it's just it keeps it a lot simpler. So you can re-sign your own free agents using whatever bird rights you have for them. So a guy like Al Horford, who the team has full bird rights on, they can pay him whatever they want. And I'm going to keep this Celtics specific for the most part. Then your next option is you can still do trades. And there's a lot of confusion about trades. You could trade a player. I'll use Porzingis because he makes almost a rough $30 million. They could still trade Kristaps Porzingis out at $30 million for 2 $15 million players, 3 $10 million players. You can always bring back more players than you send out, but you can't bring back $1 more than what you send out in trade. So that's challenging, right? Because that's very limiting in what you can do. And that's like, I think he makes 30.7. They can't bring back somebody who makes 30.8. Like, not allowed. You're not allowed to do that. You have to be even or under, but you can't bring back more than what you send out. You can make
a trade. Is that a second apron rule, or is that just in general you can't?
That's a second apron rule now.
Okay.
So that's really kind of a first apron rule. And then there's like a second apron add-on to that. Related to that though, you can bring back less money. You could trade out 30 million and let's just say the Nets were like, hey, we're feeling friendly. We'll take on Porzingis' contract for a draft pick. And Celtics send him there. and they take back draft rights to somebody who may never play in the NBA or something, you can take back $0 in a trade. You're allowed to do that. But here's what you can't do. They can't take Kristaps Porzingis at $30 million and Sam Hauser at $10 million and go get a $40 million player. You're no longer allowed to aggregate player salaries together in a trade when you're above the second apron. So you can make trades, but you're heavily restricted on that. You can re-sign your own guys. Then as far as bringing in outside talent, you can sign your own draft picks. No restrictions on that. And you can sign players to minimum contracts. No restrictions on that. Either we saw that in season with Torrey Craig. We saw that a couple years ago with guys like Lamar Stevens and Dylan O'Banton and those guys. So that's kind of where you're at. You're very, very limited trade options. You can't really go out and play in free agency in a big way, but you can re-sign your own guys and you can sign your own draft picks. That's really all you can do as a second apron team.
So here's the thing. So I hear, and I'm telling you, this is somebody, I'm still kind of learning everything here. I hear that list and I tell myself, well, they have all these great players under contract for years. So just the basketball penalties don't actually seem to be that impactful because they do have these guys under contract, right? Unless you say, this iteration of this team can't win anymore and like we kind of want to blow it up and now we're in a little bit of a tougher spot than we would have been. So when you look at this, is it more the financial penalties that are prohibitive and like are, if they were to just have a crazy offseason and get rid of a bunch of guys, would you take that more of a sign that like, okay, the new ownership does not want to spend? Or is it in reality, this is maybe more prohibitive than it sounds to me when you're thinking about long-term team building?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of both in there. I think it, as currently constructed, and we'll take Jason Tatum out of the mix for next year somewhat. And I know somebody asked a question on Twitter, which is a really good question about could Tatum come back and that, and I don't know if we'll get to that or not, but let's take him out of the mix. It would be really irresponsible to pay roughly $500 million for a team that's not a title contender. And I don't think they're a title contender without Jason Tatum. That's just, my opinion. I think Drew Holiday's gotten older. Kristaps Porzingis misses time. We don't really know what Al Horford's status is going to be. Still good, but I don't know that he's going to hold up playing 30 minutes a night. If that's the case, we'll see where Jaylen Brown is with the knee injury. Good reporting by you, by the way, for being at that event. Let me quick sidebar on that. That's a great example of the hustle it takes to do this job well. Go to those events. If people want to do things like this and build relationships with players and with people from teams and the like, you have to be at events like that. Can't just be going to games and hanging out there and trying to talk to guys that way. Like that's when you're going to get good stuff. So I just wanted to throw that in there. Really well done.
Thank you. No, I get a lot of questions all the time from fans who are like, I want to be a sports reporter. So maybe I'll do an off-season podcast on advice too.
Yeah, that's a good
one. Because
there
is so much stuff I've learned already just from going
absolutely.
to things. And
yeah, I think that's great. All right. So now back to your question, financial versus basketball penalties. So the basketball penalties are very real because it's going to be really hard to improve this team. And let's face it, if you lose in the second round, you probably need to improve, right? And then you lose in the second round on top of at least the best player on the team, in my opinion, and one of the best players in the league is going to be out for a large chunk, if not all, of next season. It's going to be really hard to improve the team from there. But there is nothing that says the Celtics must trade guys away or shed salary or anything like that, unless that comes from ownership, whether that's current outgoing ownership, incoming ownership, some mix, whatever it may be. They come in and say, hey, we cannot pay $500 million in salary plus taxes for a team that's probably, in my opinion, still a playoff team, but not really a title contender. Then that puts it on the front office to, all right, we got to reduce the tax bill. I don't know how well that will fly, but I think and I keep using this term and I hate it, but I can't come up with a better one. They have a little bit of cover, if you will, in that there are basketball penalties or roster building penalties, better way to put that we can also remove as we lessen the overall salary and tax burden on the team. And I think that's where I think everybody can start to be like, all right, that makes a lot more sense. I can understand that because if what they're trying to do is make it so, hey, in 2026, 2027 and beyond, we're not burdened under these restrictions, then I think that makes a huge difference for the team. And that's where I think things are going to kind of fall this summer.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I do think I've been using the word cover too, because I was thinking, I thought this team was going to make the finals this season. And I was thinking it's going to be really hard for them, especially if new ownership wants to save money, to then go and trade away Drew Holiday, who was a critical part of another finals run. Now it's not that hard from an optic standpoint because you have all these reasons. And obviously the Tatum injury changes things as well, because now you're saying, why would you pay so much for a team that's not going to contend, which I think most fans don't think this team can contend without Tatum. So it's not a controversial take by ownership to, act that way. One last thing on the second apron. I just wanted to ask you about the draft pick situation and how picks get moved to the end and get frozen. Could you just explain that portion as well? Because I know that's something that I've been hearing a lot about.
Yeah, so there's two different things with this. And I think what gets confusing is these didn't come in right away. The CBA had a phase-in approach where some of the things took place, like how the Celtics even got Drew Holiday in the first place was because of the phase-in of the rules, because they didn't trade out more than they brought back in the Holiday trade. Now they wouldn't be able to do that trade, and I know I talked that to death. Same with the Bucks getting Damian Lillard. It was like, yeah, they wouldn't have been able to do that trade when it went down, but the phase-in approach got really, I think, hard for people with this whole frozen draft pick thing. So to be clear, right now, the Celtics 2032 draft pick, because they finished the season over as a second apron team, is frozen, but it is frozen in terms of it cannot be traded. So they cannot trade that draft pick. They can't put it in a trade. Now, this is also, I think, confusing for a lot of folks as well. Because it's frozen means it can't be traded. That doesn't have any impacts on the 2031 pick. They could trade that. I think some people are starting to pull the Stepien rule in there, which says you can't trade first rounders in back-to-back years, or better put, you can't be without a first round pick in back-to-back years. Because the 2032 pick is frozen, it can't be traded. So the 2031 pick can still be traded. And how that works is it's 7 years out. It's the pick 7 years out. Now, with the moving to the end of the round portion, what happens there is if by the time we get there, the Celtics are still dealing with the second apron restrictions, the pick will be moved to the end of the first round. And just because then the next question is, well, what if there are three teams with the same pick? Then it just, like it always does, it goes in reverse order of the standings. So that 2032 pick, if they're still dealing with it, gets moved to the end of the first round. And let's say, because they're in the same boat, Phoenix and Minnesota happen to be in the same place. Whoever's the worst gets the 28th pick. Whoever gets the next gets 29, and the worst, the best of that bunch gets the 30th. That's how that would work. Now, to avoid that restriction, as well as to unfreeze the pick, or as I like to call it, you thaw it out, because it doesn't happen instantly. It takes a little bit of time. You have to be out from underneath the second apron in 3 of the immediately following salary cap years of the pick becoming frozen. So if it gets frozen, which it is now, if the Celtics are out less than or equal to the second apron, so they're out from being over the second apron in 3 of the next 4 years, and that's league years, then the pick would become unfrozen. It falls wherever it would fall in the draft, and it can be traded again. And that's how you can, in effect, thaw that pick out to get back to it. It works very similar to the repeater tax, which I think some people are familiar with, which in the repeater tax, which Boston is also facing, when you get into the repeater tax, that's strictly a financial thing. But what that does is let's say it was, and I'm just going to keep it very simple. Let's say you're so far over that you owe $1 in tax for every dollar you're over. In the repeater tax, you could owe $2 for every dollar you're over. And that was the old way of, well, we're going to punish you by being really, really making your bill really, really expensive. And can you handle it or not? And then teams like the Warriors and Clippers are like, sure, we can. We're fine. Who cares? Like, we'll keep paying it. That's why they added all these roster building restrictions in, because we have to find a way to punish these teams beyond just the financial. Because face it, an extra 100 million, like Steve Ballmer finds that in the couch cushions,
Right.
each day. He's like, yeah, cool. All right, pay it. Like, keep being expensive. So that's how that works with the second apron and the frozen draft pick and all that stuff. So it's not the end of the world that the pick is frozen today. They've got time. We have, really 4 years to figure this out if they can get under. And that's why there's some impetus to let's try to get under sooner rather than later. So you're not having to deal with this down the line.
Awesome. That's really helpful. So say the team wants to get below the second apron. And honestly, the thing that made me feel that way the most was when Wick Grossbeck had an interview with WEI a few months ago, and he kind of said, and then nobody's going to be in the second apron, consecutive years. And when he said that, I was like, I feel like this is actually one of the biggest news pieces we've gotten in a while, because obviously he's still governor, and it knows kind of what new ownership is going to do. So say we operate under the assumption that they're going to do that this offseason. What do you think is the most feasible pathway, like most likely pathway to getting there? And I know that part of the challenge is that we have no idea what Brad Stevens is thinking and doing, and he's surprised us a million times. But if you're looking at this from a team building standpoint, like what are kind of the most likely outcomes?
Yeah, let me start with what you said there about Brad Stevens, because I think it's important to note outside of the Drew Holiday acquisition, which I think we all immediately were like, oh my gosh, he went to Portland. He didn't get rerouted to a good team. Boston's going to jump in there and get him. And they did. None of the other moves Stevens has made none of them have been broadcast very widely in advance. They've all kind of come out of nowhere where it's like, whoa, they're, getting this guy and knock on wood, almost all of them have worked out pretty well for the most part. I know it's funny. I'm now seeing the number of people who hate on the Porzingis acquisition when he was huge and winning a championship. So that part of it, that's already paid off. I don't have any issue with what they did there. Like, you won a title and that's, forever. So to your question, the phrasing I've been using is this is likely to happen incrementally, which means I don't think you're going to see one trade like Porzingis into the Nets cap space, which takes care of all of it, right? Their Celtics as it stands today, I've got them about, let me just double check. So I'm saying the right thing. About 22.7 million over the apron. That's factoring in the draft picks, keeping guys like JD Davison and Nemias Queta, as well as Jordan Walsh, because those guys are essentially on minimum deals. So factoring all that in, about 22.7 million over the second apron. If you just straight salary dumped Porzingis, you're now about 8 million under the second apron, and you've created plenty of clearance and you've done all the things you can do. Could that happen? Sure. It could. I don't think it's very likely. The other option would be Porzingis is traded to a team, the Nets or other teams are brought in as a third team. And then what happens is the Celtics are sending Porzingis out at 30.7. They should be getting back, let's say, like 24 million in trade, but they take 10 million of that and send it off to a next team, takes it on instead, and they take back 12 million. Well, now you cleared 18 million, and now you're like one or two more smaller moves away. That's a way that could happen. That's kind of the incremental piece of that. But why I say incremental is I think it's going to be a series of moves versus one move gets it done and it's finished. And I think it may take a few transaction cycles to get there, meaning the offseason, the trade deadline, the following offseason. Now, if you're not there by the trade deadline, next year's trade deadline, so February 2026, you kind of used up one of those 4 years to get out of the second apron there. And now you have a little bit of pressure of we got to get there quicker. And that's if even the draft pick being untradeable and being at the end of the first round, they even really care about that. We don't have any indication how much they care about that, because I think they'd like to be in a place where, yeah, let's have the draft pick be at the end of the round anyway, because that means we're winning the title, or
like it always
really
it's been in the end of the first round,
exactly.
in recent years.
Yeah, so I'm not sure how worried they are about that. So I think the way they get out from under the second apron is going to be over a series of moves. Porzingis, I think Sam Hauser getting moved is somewhat likely for a lot of different reasons. And then I think a Holiday move is possible. And what I've been saying about Porzingis and Holiday, and I apologize if I'm stepping on a future question here, is Porzingis is very acquirable for a lot of teams because he's on an expiring contract. Those have value again, whether it's a team that is, man, we don't have apron issues this year, but a year from now, we're going to have problems. So let's get out of some long-term money and maybe we can get off of that. And then I think with Porzingis, that's a little bit easier to sell to people. And then I think a guy like Holiday, he has a smaller market of teams, but the teams who want him or teams where he makes sense, I think are going to be more motivated to try to get him. Because let's face it, the last two teams that were like, Drew Holiday's kind of the guy who put us over the top. It worked out pretty well. He slipped. He's not the same guy he was even in his first year with Boston, but I think he's okay. And you might have a team that says, man, we are really, really close to winning the title. We can get Drew Holiday in here. We'll let tomorrow, kind of like the Celtics have done for a couple of years, we'll let tomorrow's problems be tomorrow's problems. But we're going to focus on making a run for it right now. And that's the way that could go down. We've already heard Dallas maybe has some interest, and that would be one that makes a lot of sense. And they do have a couple tradable salaries to kind of make that happen. So those are the ways I think you get there as far as getting out from under the second apron.
So it's going to be weird because there's probably going to be players that are sent to Boston, and we're all going to want to say, okay, who are these guys? How do they fit in? But they're probably going to be rerouted shortly after.
Yeah.
So I don't know if they're going to get welcome posts by the Celtics, but it's kind of that weird middle ground where the player is kind of floating.
I'm not trying to say you're too young to remember this because I'm sure you probably do. But do you remember when Danny Ainge started rebuilding the team after trading away Pierce and Garnett?
Yeah.
And there was a period where I think they made 6 trades in like a 6-week window. And it was guys like Brandon Wright. And it was like, Brandon Wright, that's cool. The Celtics had oh, he got traded 3 days later. And I remember Jameer Nelson came in a trade, I think played 1 game and then was immediately traded out in another trade after that. I don't think it's going to go quite to that extreme, but yes, we might see some guys like coming in like I'll just use the Dallas rumor, for example. If it's a guy like PJ Washington comes in, I wouldn't run to the team store and buy a PJ Washington Celtics jersey unless you want a collector's item, because I don't know that one's going to have a lot of staying power.
That makes sense. So the other one that obviously I've been hearing and people are talking about is Jaylen Brown and the potential to trade him because his contract is so massive that it would kind of alleviate a lot of their financial concerns long term. I'm curious for your standpoint, one, how do you think that a contract is perceived around the league? Do you think there are a lot of suitors that would want Jaylen Brown on a supermax contract at his current moment? And 2, how willing, from your standpoint, would the Celtics be to part ways with him? Because it does seem like long term when he signed that deal, I thought to myself, like, are him and Tatum both going to play out their entire supermax contracts in Boston? Like, how likely is that? And then they go win a championship and he wins Finals MVP, and then suddenly the idea of him being in trade rumors feels so far away, and I feel like he's kind of back in them. And I don't know if I want to call them trade rumors because it's not reports; it's just people wondering if he might get traded. But what's your take on all of that?
Yeah, I was with you when he signed his supermax, and we knew Tatum was going to sign one, which was kind of funny. And I did the same thing everybody else did with Jaylen Brown signs richest contract in NBA history until Jason Tatum signs the next newest richest one next year. But it's interesting because this is where I do kind of turn off the emotions in me as a fan of the team and the game. Is just history tells us guys don't play for one team anymore. It's very rare that we see that. So I was kind of there where it was like, all right, but then they win the title. He was a monster part of it, of course. And then, all right, him and Tatum, we finally got past all the stupid nonsense of they don't like each other. They don't like playing together, which was always dumb and created for reasons I never really understood, beyond just trying to drive, other things. But it was really in a place where it's like, okay, they work. Like they can win a title together, being, 1-1A, and this is awesome, and let's go. I get why people have gone to, all right, let's, now, all right, Tatum's out for the year. Let's really blow it up. The best value we can get is trading Jaylen Brown, probably. Let's try to do that. And I do understand that thought process, but I don't think that's where the team is. I think they are very much in a place of, hey, we're not trying to start all over here with Jason Tatum and a bunch of dudes on rookie scale and less than $20 million contracts. I think we're going to take a gap year. We're going to reset a little bit and we're going to get back after this. And to me, that is Jaylen Brown's a huge part of that. You also have the knee injury. That's certainly going to scare some teams off where it's going to be, there's a little uncertainty in there now. We don't know. Is he going to undergo surgery and miss a chunk of next season? What would that look like? And at 50 plus million, is that a risk we want to take on? Is this going to become a year to year thing with him or a regular thing where it's, Jaylen Brown's out for the next 2 weeks because of knee soreness or whatever it may be. So that would scare some teams off. And then there are some teams that are going to look at it and say, man, that's a big contract for a guy we're not sold as an all NBA level guy. And in the new world, because of the aprons and all of the other things that come with that, I think teams are going to start being a lot more stingy in some cases and smart, though, also about, I don't know that we can just say max deal, max deal, max deal, take on guys with max deals in trades and the like. Because I think as much as it's worked out well for the Celtics, I think some teams are probably looking at a team like Phoenix and like, man, if Jaylen Brown's deal starts to look a little more like Bradley Beal's instead of, what it is today, that puts us in a really rough spot. Now we're stuck. All that said, there are certainly teams that would say, we'd love Jaylen Brown. What would it take? Right? There's a bunch of teams in the league that they don't have a Jaylen Brown level of player who's a proven performer, who is an all-star guy, has made All-NBA, won Finals MVP. They would love to have a guy like that to be, all right, we're going to build around him moving forward. So I don't think they would have a lot of trouble if Brad Stevens quietly put it out there like, hey, Jaylen's available. What does it take? They would get very real and very good offers. I just don't think that's the way the team's going to go.
And the question is, are those offers worth losing Jaylen Brown for? Like, I know some stars have been, some Celtics fans have been like, oh, what if you got Giannis for him? But that doesn't seem very plausible. It's most likely the packages that you would get for him would not include a player of his caliber, right? It would be more of kind of getting young, promising.
Yeah, you're getting younger. You're getting another team's contracts they're not necessarily bad contracts, but you're not jumping up and down about, oh my God, we got this guy on a steal or anything like that. It'd very much be we're resetting a little bit. We're getting out of his money long term, and that's going to help the cap sheet moving forward for years. And we're really going to reset around Jason Tatum. I'll say this too. I am extremely hopeful because it's 2025. He had the surgery right away that Jason Tatum can come back and be some level of very near what we've always seen him as. I'm very, very hopeful. But there is doubt because that's an injury that is, even though it doesn't end careers the way it once did, it has still changed a lot of players' careers. And if I'm the Celtics, and again, my goal is, all right, we still want to win. We still want to be a contender. Maybe not next season, but in the years after that. Well, I want to be able to still have Jaylen Brown to lean on if Jason Tatum is not Jason Tatum again right away, or even if he's not Jason Tatum at all, and he's just merely a very good player instead of a great one. Well, now at least we still have Jaylen Brown, and we're not kind of restarting all over again like that.
That's kind of been my thought process, is the idea of like sell off all your really good players. Like I've even seen Derek White's name in trade rumors.
Yeah.
Like get rid of those guys because when Tatum comes back, you don't want Derek White to be 32. You want to have a 25-year-old. It really rests on the idea that Tatum's going to come back and be this like savior. And first of all, he's always had great players around him. So that's not really, accurate, but also it's, you don't know exactly what state he's going to be in. And you don't want to, I don't think you want to put everything on the prospect of him being exactly who he was beforehand. Though I agree with you. I'm optimistic about his chances as well. On the Tatum piece, I know people were wondering about an injury exception and how that might work. And my understanding is that you're welcome to sign a player in that slot, but that it still costs towards all of your luxury taxes and penalties. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so that's the very simple way to put it. So what the Celtics will be eligible to do, and I do expect them to do this, is apply for a disabled player exception so that how the disabled player exception works is it's either worth half the player's salary with a cap at the non-taxpayer mid-level exception. Clearly, Jason Tatum's well beyond that on his max deal. So the Celtics would get it projects to be about $14.1 million. Now, to use that, though, that it all counts. The easiest way to think of this, everything counts towards the tax and the aprons. Whatever your number is on the cap sheet, that at least is your number towards the tax. There's sometimes when it's even a little more if you have like bonuses in there and things like that you haven't triggered yet, but they're still in the contract. You could count more towards the apron, but Celtics could use that. But here's the issue with the disabled player exception. Couple things. It's extremely restrictive to use. The idea is not to let Boston replace Jason Tatum for the next 4 years. It's to replace a player who is out for this season with some form of semi-valuable replacement level. So what that means is you can get a player on a ending contract, meaning they are either signed for 1 year using the exception, or you trade for a player who has a true ending contract. Can't be non-guaranteed the next year, can't have an option, has to be truly a
like a Porzingis deal.
Yep, yeah, exactly. Yep. And the contract obviously needs to fit within that exception of 14.1 million. If you can pull all those things off, you get the player. The next follow-up question is usually, but if they use that, then Jason Tatum's definitely out for the year. My dream of him coming back in late March or early April to help the team and be available for the playoffs is out the window. It doesn't actually mean that. If we go back to Gordon Hayward when he got hurt on opening night, it didn't end up playing out this way because he ended up needing a subsequent surgery. But there was all this talk of, hey, maybe Gordon Hayward can come back and play, at the end of the season. Where's that going to be? And we were all, hey, Gordon Hayward's, running again. Does he look normal? What is that? Hey, I think I saw a little jump on that jumper. All the same stuff we'll do with Tatum next time we see videos of him out there doing anything. But with Gordon Hayward, the thought process was, and I'm going to hit you a little bit of trivia. They used the disabled player exception they got for Gordon Hayward to sign a player. Do you know who it was?
I knew this question was coming. I can't remember.
It was Greg Monroe.
Oh, that's ironic. Yeah.
Yeah. After he got bought out, he got traded and then bought out. The Celtics signed Greg Monroe for $5 million for the rest of the year. Out of he was 9 or 10 million that they could have signed him for fully. They gave him 5. So little piece of trivia there. But even though Greg Monroe was on the team, if Hayward had been able to come back, they kind of look at it and say, okay, well, you got lucky. Congratulations. You don't lose the player that you signed.
Oh, okay.
Nothing like that happens. They don't change the salary or anything like that. Your guy recovered quicker than anybody thought he would. Because in order to get it, it has to be found that the player will be out for the entire, found more likely than not to miss the entirety of the remainder of the season. So that's where they kind of,
and this type of injury, that's the norm. So
yeah,
there would be no doubt to show that.
Yeah, I would be shocked if they didn't get it. Now, some people have said, well, they're not going to trade Kristaps Porzingis and move Drew Holiday and move Sam Hauser just to throw $14 million back on the books, right? No, you're probably right. But this is just lessons from my dad was you always put the tool in your toolbox because you don't want to show up somewhere and be like, man, you know what I need? I need a hammer and I don't have it. Like I only have a screwdriver. And then it becomes, all right, well, let's, figure it out. What are we going to do? You put the tool in your toolbox. A lot of times you don't use it. You don't need it, but at least you have it in case something becomes available for you to use it on later.
So the one I think I was going to ask you about just potential trades, and we acknowledging again that it's really hard to predict this stuff. One of the things that I've learned on this job is that the guys that the fans are clamoring to get traded, like everybody wants Porzingis traded, is also because his trade value is very low right now relative to what it could be after the postseason run and the illness and everything that he's been dealing with. And when you look at guys like, Marcus Smart, he was probably traded right before his value really sunk, or a lot of these players over the years. So what are, is there a chance here that they kind of don't sell on Porzingis right now, considering that his value is kind of at an all-time low for him, and maybe bring him back in the fall and see if he plays better for the first few months and trade him at the deadline? Or could you see any, something like that happening, and maybe a trade of a guy? I don't think anybody would want to see Derek White or Peyton Pritchard be traded this summer after the years that they had and the contracts they're on. But I'm sure that a lot more teams want those two contracts on their books than Porzingis or Drew Holiday. So how do you kind of balance those two things as you're forecasting kind of how the offseason might play out here?
Yeah, and that's a really great question. So there's a couple things before I dive fully into the answer on that I do want to reference because I think they're important to know. Celtics do not need to get under this second apron by the start of the season or anything like that. Because, like you said, they could bring the whole team back and be like, we'll work on it, up through the trade deadline. And we already talked about they don't even really need to do it by the trade deadline, but that's probably more likely. And the reason why you do it in the summertime, it's just a lot easier. You have teams with exceptions available. You have teams with cap space available. You have, roster limits increase. So you can do a 3-for-1 type of trade where you're, taking back more guys than you send out and those sorts of things that happen that just don't exist when you're in season with that. The other piece is with that is you can always make those trades later if that's where you feel you need to, just from a performance standpoint, if you really wanted to get there. So that's it. And then I would say trade value wise, yeah, Porzingis it's not great. It's probably lower than it was even when the Celtics got him. And it's important to remember the Celtics got a first round pick in that trade to bring Porzingis in. Now, that pick came ultimately from the Grizzlies for Marcus Smart, but that was kind of a sense of where the Wizards are like, yeah, we're not, this guy's just going to pick up his player option and make life more difficult for us if we don't move him. So let's just, get off this contract. And then, obviously it ended up working out for the Celtics the way it worked out, which was, in a title. But yeah, with this mystery illness that he's been dealing with, which is who knows where that is. And I've talked to people around the league who are like, if that thing lingers into next year, like this is now you're talking about his entire career trajectory changes because no one's gonna, even as it is, then it becomes more of he becomes Kristaps Porzingis expiring contract versus Kristaps Porzingis basketball player. And that's not where you want to be, right? You want to be, if we're being completely brutal about this, and we have to, you want to be some level of combination of basketball player and expiring contract, right? It would be nice to think of him just as the basketball player, but that's not the way it goes. And I say that with, I hope whatever this is, when we hear from him next, he's like, I feel great. Like it's gone. Like whatever it was is gone, or we figured it out. We figured out how to heal up. Because that's just, I want the best for him as a person, obviously. So now with Porzingis, you get into the question, and similar to Drew Holiday as well, because of the age concerns and the money left on his deal. Are we in a spot where it's all right to trade him? The Celtics are going to have to give up capital to get off of the deals. Whether that is we're going to have to give up draft picks to get off the contracts, or we're going to have to put in Peyton Pritchard, or if a team is like, man, we really love Baylor Shireman, put him into a deal to get off of it. I don't think we're there. Again, Porzingis expiring contract that'll have value to some teams, even if it means, hey, Celtics, we need you to take back longer term money, even if it's a lot less money, but that helps us out next year and beyond. Or with Drew Holiday, I don't think it's there just because I think Drew Holiday is good enough to push a team over the top still, where they might be like, all right, we'll deal with the out years on the contract there. And I don't know that Boston's going to be, if they're worried about dodging the second apron to save the draft pick, then why are we just going to start throwing them away to dump contracts? Like it doesn't make sense. Now that's not to say they wouldn't trade Kristaps Porzingis in a first round pick to get players who can be helpful like that, but that's a different thing, right? That's a whole different thing than we're just straight up salary dumping. Because I've been, my running joke on this is Sean Marks should start the offseason standing in front of the Barclays Center, holding up a tablet that says, bring me your tired, you're hungry, your bad contracts. Just send him with a draft pick and I'm happy because like he's got $60 million in cap space and I don't know who he's spending it on. So of course he'd be like, you want to send a first round pick with Porzingis? Done. Let's go. Like doesn't really change anything for the Nets long term, except now I have one more pick in my stash that I can eventually use somehow. But I just don't know that the Celtics are there or feel the need to do that at this point.
That makes sense. Yeah, and it's pretty fascinating that there's only one team in the league in that position. You would think, like, as if you look at all the tiers, you would imagine that there would be a number of teams that are in that spot, but it's just so you really have to have the Nets as your trading partner. And I'm sure a
Yeah.
lot of teams are looking at the Nets and they have a very busy phone line right now.
Yeah.
Um,
Sean Marks
Bill,
is just like, come on, come to me. Let's go.
not a
Right.
bad
Like,
spot to be in. You
yeah.
have a lot of
Yeah. I mean,
leverage.
that's where it wasn't so much with cap space, but that was, Danny Ainge for a little bit there was, yeah, send a guy here. We'll take him with a draft pick. We'll take him with a draft pick. And when Marks did this before, he did pretty well putting together a team kind of on the fly with a lot of reclamation projects and doing what I like to call the diamond mining process, which was just, we're going to try out 7, 8 different guys and see what it looks like and try to bring them in. So, yeah.
So the last thing that I wanted to ask you, because I still find, obviously everything that happened, it was just 2 weeks ago yesterday that Tatum tore his Achilles. Feels like it
Crazy.
was years ago.
Yeah. That was months
Right,
ago.
right. It's so crazy. And so the big discussion topic is like take a gap year, right? They're not going to contend next year anyways. And so in your eyes, and it seems like you're kind of on board with that idea, right? The next year is going to be some sort of gap year for this
Yep.
team and their title path. In that sense, is there any point in bringing back somebody like Al Horford? Is there any point in trying to be as competitive as possible next year? Because I hate tanking. I hate the idea. And I know some of it is just like, it's just life and it's part of the way this league works. But I hate the idea of going into a season not trying to be as competitive as possible, because we just saw Dallas and Philadelphia came in thinking they were going to win the championship, and then they both got top 3 picks, right? So it's like you could pivot at a certain point. But so what does it actually mean to go in and say, we're trying to be competitive, but also it's a gap year? Like, how do you kind of think through that?
Yeah, it's a tough spot. And this is kind of the all or nothing approach in the NBA. The reality is it's very much a fan and analyst driven thing, but some teams believe in that as well. There are teams that are, look, if we're not contending for a title, it doesn't make sense to be anything but a rebuilding team or a team that's like on their way up to that, right? Because you can't perpetually rebuild, because we've seen that goes nowhere good. So I think for the Celtics, so you brought up Al Horford. I think there's a couple questions that are in play there. One, does he want to play for another year? Does it mean so much to him to just stay in Boston, leave his family there, not have to do all the things as far as like, all right, you guys are going to stay here or go here, and I'm going to go play for, I'm making it up, but I'm going to go play for, the Lakers, which would be horrible, and I hope never happens. But like where, like, is that more important than being where he likes being? He's very happy to be there. I mean, I take him at his word when he said, when he got brought back to Boston, of, I never should have left in the first place. This is, I should have stayed here all along, and what happened, but I hope to never play anywhere else. And I think there is a world where if I'm the Celtics, I'm going into it exactly with the approach that you said of, we're going to try to be as good as possible, but with some guardrails. Like, we're not going to go add a bunch of, they can't really add a bunch of salary, but we're not going to go crazy with, let's give Horford 20 million next year. Let's give Cornette 15 just to keep both of them. And now, we're, 50 million into the second apron. Like, I don't think that's going to happen, but you could say, you know what, we moved Porzingis, that put us in range of dodging the second apron. But we'll go a little higher over to bring back Cornette and Horford. And then we'll maybe move Sam Hauser or somebody, and that's how we get under the apron. That could be the way I see them going forward, because there is a world where they're still pretty good. Like, I think that they could still be pretty good even without Jason Tatum. Not as good, not title contender good. And who knows if they're getting a read in the next, because let's face it, right, the offseason's still over a month away. If they're getting the read by the end of June, beginning of July, of like, Tatum maybe could be back before the end of next year, it might be like, all right, let's just, ride it out. Let's do the best we can to try to go. I still think that's going to come with, let's trim the bill a little. Let's go. But that could be, all right, Sam Hauser, we kind of know what he is, $10 million. Let's give those minutes to Baylor Shireman. Let's give those minutes to player X that we draft this year and move forward. And that could be the line of thinking from the front office and coaching staff and ownership of, all right, that's kind of a luxury to have him as a $10 million bench shooter. Let's go in a little bit of a different direction. And if that means we lose a game or two, all right, we lose a game or two, but it's not the end of the world. We go there because maybe that means by the time 2026, 27 rolls around, Shireman's ready for a real rotation role. And now we're right back rolling where we were. And I think that's where re-signing Horford, re-signing Cornette become the conversation points of we can't go crazy, but let's be reasonable and let's see. And I don't blame either of those guys if they're like, man, I really want to win. Like I don't want to just be on a team that's fighting to make the playoffs. And the last thing I'll say is, because I've had this question, I'm sure you have, is shouldn't they just blow it up and tank for a year and start over? One, I don't know how much Jason Tatum would love walking back into the locker room or facility or whatever you want to use. And he's like, who are all these guys? And I know he'll obviously be around the team more than that, but you know what I mean? But he's just, it's like the Will Smith meme, right? Where he's like looking around the empty family room and he's like, I don't even know who's here anymore. And cool, now I'm playing with a bunch of dudes in their first, second, and third years. Like, he's not going to love that. That's not going to be anything he wants to do. Then you run into, all right, are you going to get enough for all of these guys? This is not Danny Ainge saying the Pierce, Garnett, Rondo group took us as far as it could go. We got everything out of it that we could. It is time to start over and let's fully tear this thing down to the studs. The other thing is the East is not good enough for the Celtics to bottom out fully. I mean, they'd have to get ridiculous about it to be, man, we traded Brown, we traded Holiday, we traded Porzingis, and all we got back of value were draft picks. And the team is now so terrible that, you know, they're moving forward, you know, with Peyton Pritchard is averaging 30 a game because he's taking 30 shots a night because he's all that's left. I think they're going to do everything they can to, all right, let's kind of, we'll take a step back. We're going to get payroll in line a little, and then we go forward from there. And I think that's the smart move.
And the one thing that Brad Stevens did say in his press conference, which he didn't say much, but that the goal every year is to compete for a championship or to be as close as possible to that. So it would be a big departure from what we've seen to now say we're going to do a tank year. And honestly, seeing the way some of the tanks worked out for some of the bottom feeding teams in the league this year, like I like that the lottery is like that. I think it's good that it doesn't incentivize you to try to lose all your games, but it was pretty wild to see teams like the Wizards and ones that you feel like they need a top 3 pick badly, not even end up there. And it is interesting. No,
go ahead.
I was just going to say with Tatum, it's almost been ruled out in everybody's mind that he returns next year because it's an Achilles rupture. And it just feels like, why would they rush it? He's 27. We don't really have a timeline. The doctors that I've spoken to said that it's anywhere from 7 to 15 months, which is kind of a ridiculous, spectrum when it comes to an injury. His dad, which I don't know if his dad had any reason to give a timeline, but this timeline was 8 to 9 months, which means he'd be back in February. So that's in time for the season. So it feels like we as a outside world, media fans have ruled him out for next year, but he hasn't actually been ruled out for the season. So it is an interesting concept because if internally they're having conversations around like actually he's vying to return in February, I wonder how much that changes everything that we're talking about as far as next year being a gap year versus like they have to win as many games as possible and he's vying for a return, which again I would lean against that because it does feel like they're not going to rush him. But you just don't know because we know there's new technology and his age and everything that all the factors in play.
And where I was going to go, because it ties into that nicely, is you can still make decisions in season. Let's say they go in with Tatum will be back sometime after the trade deadline. They feel pretty good about that. And they're like, we're going to go. And let's just say not a setback, but it's just not progressing as quickly as we had hoped for. It's not on the front end of the timeline. It's more on the mid range of it or whatever. And it's going to be at the end of the year. Maybe it's kind of what the Grizzlies did with Brandon Clark a year ago, which was bring him back, get him some game action at the end of a lost season for the Grizzlies. And then that way, when he comes in at training camp and preseason starting next year, that's already done. That's already out of his head. It's like, I can run and jump again. It'll all be okay. And I can play in a crowd and I can do all the things I need to do. Maybe they do that. The other option is, let's say the season's going along and it's like, man, this season, we thought we could be competitive, but it's just not working out. And the other teams in the Philly finally got the magical healthy season and they're good. And other teams have taken big steps forward and we're just not where we want to be. You can always pull the plug at some point in the year and be like, all right, let's sit a guy. Let's bench a dude. Jaylen Brown's knee is acting up. We're going to sit him out for a while and kind of do what Philly did to some extent where it is, let's go. And you're not even fighting the draft pick protections. this year. So it could just be, all right, it didn't go the way we thought, or let's say another injury pops up. And it's like, man, because every year there are teams that they pass the point of no return, right? The wheels fell off the bus and there's nothing we can do now and we're not going anywhere. And that could be the way it goes. So I think there's a lot of options for this. And I don't know that anything we find out on draft week or June 30th or July 1st is definitively going to tell us one thing or another with where this team is going. I think there's a very high likelihood it could be, yeah, we made some moves because we felt like those were the best moves. And now, and of course, that's all they're ever going to say anyway, right, publicly. But it'll be, yeah, we made some moves, saved a little bit of money. We're moving in a little bit of a different direction. And here we go with this. And I think that's the smart way for them to handle it.
Awesome. Keith, thank you so much. This has been so informative. I've learned a lot. I can understand why everybody told me to reach out to you. So I really appreciate it. Anything you want to plug as it relates to your work or anything else before we close here?
Yeah, if people like this stuff and are super into roster stuff, even just beyond the Celtics, all my work at Spotrac is going up. We're in the midst of all of our off-season stuff there. So we've got team previews going up where Atlanta posted yesterday. We go in order of elimination. So we're almost through the non-playoff teams. Dallas will be next. Then we'll get into the playoff teams after that. So we still got a little ways to go before the Celtics pop up, but I will get those up there. We're about halfway through them. So those are going up. I've got free agent previews. The point guards are posted. The shooting guards are going up soon. So those are all moving there as well. And we'll have a lot of extension conversations and all that stuff coming out. And then all the, reacting to whatever happens this summer with that. And then if you like the more audio or visual version, NBA Front Office Show, that's my podcast with Trevor Lane. We do that right now. We're on about a 3 times a week schedule, but we record as necessary in the off season. And we do a lot of talk about roster and cap stuff there. And every Friday we call it Front Office Friday. We have a lot of fun. It's a listener driven show where we just answer questions the whole time. So, if you're interested, hop in there and join and have fun. And we have a blast on those Front Office Fridays.
Awesome. That sounds great. And there's not a lot of resources, honestly, on this stuff. So this is kind of the go-to place for all the cap conversations. Anything else you guys want to hear analysis from the Celtics and just what's happening right now? We're doing Garden Report episodes. You can find that all on CLNS Media. You can find a breakdown of my conversation with Jaylen Brown on CLNS Media as well. And that's all for now. Thanks again, Keith. It was awesome to have you. Thanks everybody for listening. Subscribe to You Got Boston podcast. Subscribe to CLNS Media on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, all that. And enjoy the rest of your day.